When we decided to put together this grader training, I came up with this whole laundry list of topics. And when we started looking at these topics, we started realizing that we were probably going to have about 3 minutes to discuss each one. So we decided to back off a little bit, and we're only going to talk basically about 2 things today. The rest of them we're going to end up developing into what we want to be a grader course. We don't know how many sessions it's going to be, maybe 5, somewhere around that range, but we cut today way down. We're going to talk basically about how to score tasting exam score sheets. Number 1, that's going to be the vast majority of what we talk about. And then we're going to talk a little bit about proctoring. As you can see, David Teckham was the one that developed this course. Brian did quite a bit on it too. I helped put together the PowerPoint, so it was kind of a 3-way collaboration on this thing.
All right, a little bit of background, mostly on why this needs to be done. I've had graders with a lot of experience, in getting overall grade scores coming in and being fairly accurate. But there is still kind of some inconsistencies. Plus, there's obviously a lot of new graders coming in. So kind of a twofold here. 1, give some good grader education for the new graders coming in. Make sure they know what to do, what's expected, etc. But also for the graders that have been around a long time, we're really getting this fine-tuned on what's expected, what you should be getting to make sure we're consistent, because that is one of the kind of major things. And not just consistent on the overall score, but for each component to be consistent, because that's a big part of the feedback. So that, when the examinee looks at their RTP that comes back and they see, it's like, oh, well, I scored high on completeness and low on feedback. They know what to, that's a very quick and easy way to get some feedback so they know what they need to work on. Transparent, consistent process, basically doing the metrics after the score sheets, doing all that, just basically all this stuff going through. So it was knowing we needed to do that, and kind of along the bottom, metrics rubric intended to minimize subjectivity. That was a big thing. It's on the BJCP website. It's available to anybody, not just the graders. It is the score sheet, BJCP score sheet guide is what it's called. And that was made by the education directors, feedback from the associate exam directors, etc. And that's to give the direction and give the consistency. This is the standard, to set a standard on how to grade and get the proper grades for each of the components. Kind of a reference. You still got independent thinking on there, but that's also what we're looking for from the examinees. Independent thinking, not just regurgitating the style guidelines. So granted, we've got this score sheet guide, and it's going to give you rubrics, competencies, everything. Well, we don't want to make a bunch of robot judges. You still need to be able to process the information. So that's kind of the big thing we're going through, is just say, all right, as a grader, you need to identify, it's like, yes, this person knows what they're talking about. They didn't just write down what they think they should have perceived, because that's what the guidelines said. So you need to kind of dig through that, but also following the guidelines that were created, this rubric, to know it's like, okay, well, if they do this and this and this, it should be roughly in here. And then you just got your little tweaks and variations that you create by how you feel they did independent thinking. It's making sure they're understanding, they're a good judge, they're logically thinking through, identifying, processing the data, and understand what they need to do. Next we're going to go on, we're actually going to cover the 5 competencies that you grade on. Okay, scoring accuracy is the first one we're going to go over. Now, there is direct formulas right in the EGF. For all you graders, you know, basically it comes in and it's spit out and it says, here you go. Here's the score they got for a scoring competency. What I do want to note is there is some ability to adjust that proctor's consensus. Don't think that you need to adjust it every time. This should be kind of a minimal amount needed to do that. The education directors already looked through it a little, but it is worthwhile to take a peek at it, look at, all right, this is what the admin said the beer should be. That's why they picked it. Proctors didn't have that information. Here's the proctor's score. You can read through their score, but then also you can go through all of the examinees. You'll be able to, you can take a average score, look at the standard deviation. If it's all over the place, well, it's all over the place. But if you can see a lot of the examinees are pretty much fine-tuned into a certain score, and the proctors are quite a ways off, and then you look at the admin, or the admin's description, and say, oh, well, yeah, looks like all the examinees look a little more accurate than the proctor. Read over the proctor's score sheet, say, oh yeah, but based on the description, I don't know why they didn't adjust their score. Well, right there, you've got a lot of data to say, maybe that consensus could be adjusted. So if you want to do that, you highlight it, you kind of pass it on up to the AD, and the AD say, well, I recommend this consensus score change based on this stuff. But just look at it. Don't get too worried. Don't think you know more than what the proctors did. It's just kind of, you got more information than any one part had up to that point. So review it. The other thing I want to point on, last bullet, is do not allow scoring accuracy to influence scoring on other 4 components. I see that quite a bit coming through, where it seems like graders are looking at the scoring accuracy and they're like, oh, well, they got about a certified scoring accuracy. So they must be about a certified judge. And whether they mean to or not, you get this, you're influenced. Now you're trying to look at it, it's like, oh, their descriptive ability, their perception, and you might be tweaking it. When I grade exams, I don't even touch the scoring. Don't even look at it. You need to keep these 5 components independent. So I just don't even look at the scoring accuracy until I'm all done, because I don't even want to take the chance that it influences my impact. So I go through that. So that's kind of that's the major point I want to make here, is make sure, if you need to just do that where you say, I'm not even going to look at scoring accuracy until everything's done, do that. You can, at that point, say, like, oh, yeah, they were on the border. The scoring accuracy can kind of bump you up and down a rank or 2. So, just kind of take a peek of it then. Move on. I think the next one's going to be perception. Yeah. All right. So this is pretty much, I just pulled this right from the BJCP score sheet guide. It is probably one of the most difficult to grade, because things can be all over the place. You have proctors that aren't agreeing, and they may be missing something. You got admin, so you got a lot of information here. This is one of these things where you need to set up a process. And I think kind of go through some of this process here, even though in the intro we showed you we're going to talk about process later, but the perception is probably the most important to get a good process down on determining what that beer is supposed to be. First thing you need to do is determine your consensus perception. And I think what it appears that some graders are doing is pretty much trying to come out with exactly what that beer is based on all the information you're getting. So they may say, yep, I decided medium body. If the examinee doesn't write medium body, they're getting docked because their perception is off. Well, if you had 3 proctors and one said light body, one said medium full body, and one said medium body, but the consensus is medium body, you got quite a bit of range there just in your proctors alone. So how do you dock an examinee for saying medium light body just because it didn't hit medium body? You gotta keep that into account. Now, if all 3 proctors, every one of them said medium body, it was a commercial example, the admin provide you that info, you're like, yeah, now you've had that beer, that's a medium body. Well, then you have less leniency. If they start saying medium, the examinee starts saying medium full body, then maybe you do a little more dock. So you have to keep this in mind while you're doing the grading, that there's not only the precise, what you come up with the consensus, but also what's the range that's acceptable. And for some components of a beer, some characteristics, you're going to see a wider range at least that's acceptable, and sometimes it's got to be pretty specific. So that is one thing you really need to watch. So the common variations. So yeah, don't forget to use the examinees also. Read their data. So kind of a typical process myself, and I think a lot of graders I've talked to, we get the info, you want to start grading, you go one beer at a time, not one examinee at a time, one beer at a time. So you get your consensus, and you read over the proctor score sheets, what the admin says about it, read the examinee score sheets. You don't have to be going crazy on notes and actually grading it, just skim through it, get a good idea. It's like, oh, proctors were pretty tight, they were close, pretty much had the same stuff going on. Oh, the examinees in general are all in the same area as far as their description of the beer. So work through that. You see, okay, well, they're pretty dead on. But then also note, it's like, wow, there were 12 examinees and 8 of them picked up something that the proctors didn't. Maybe that was actually there and the proctors just missed it. So you get that up front so that when you start grading, if you don't do that up front and you start grading, you're halfway through grading, you've been docking examinees up to that point for, hey, this is not supposed to be there. Then you start like, oh, well, maybe it is supposed to be there. Now you gotta go back and recheck or regrade, or you've been off on those first examinees. So that's kind of process as far as perception-wise, is get through there, get your rough idea, and dial it down into what you want. This is kind of continuation on the full, partial, or no credit. It's that, what's your variation allowed? Are you pretty much determined that everybody's got this one character, whether it's body, carbonation, pretty much on track? Then yeah, you can have a very narrow range of what's acceptable, and you would dock points for the 1 or 2 that might be out of there. If it's pretty wide range, then you're like, all right, we'll give full credit for being dead on, and you start giving some partial credit as it goes. A big key here, don't create a lengthy list of characteristics. 6 to 8 of the essence. If you make this huge list, you are just making it impossible for examinees to get a high score, because nobody's going to get an entire list of whatever you pick. That's like, well, this proctor picked up all these, this proctor picked up all these, I'm going to make one huge list even though they didn't all get that. And now you expect the examinees to meet that list? It's not going to happen. So what you really have to do is play off those 6 to 8. Like, okay, here's the keys. These are the primary and major secondary characteristics. Those are the important ones that have to be there. If those are missed, then you start docking points. Now, the examinees may also have some additional things they describe, as will the proctors. They may not be in that 6 to 8 characteristics that you determined are the essence of that beer. Well, if they're kind of in your secondary list, or things that have been with the proctor, then this is your list of acceptable items that you don't dock for not being there. So you got the must-haves, the dock if they're there but not needed, and then you may have a list of, well, basically anything that's not on there, it's like, well, no, that shouldn't have been there. If they listed it, then that's a you dock for. Okay, so your characteristic levels. So this is basically gone through the whole different levels, going through, you got 3 levels, you got proctors can be input, you got admin, and you got to kind of determine what's important, what's not, and get through all that. Also remembering that levels of perception can vary from person to person. So keep a little bit of mind in that, along with the descriptions can change. What someone calls a bready, someone may call cracker. All right, slightly different, yeah, but very similar, yes. Definitely different than saying bready and caramel or roast. I mean, those are obviously way different. So keep that in mind. I mean, don't be total Nazi on the, it's like, oh, no. The proctors, where they were clear, this is bready. They said crackers. You're totally wrong. You have no idea what you're doing. Don't be a jerk like that. And for each of these sections, we're kind of going to do a couple bullet points on some common mistakes we see. Kind of already discussed, but not allowing for the variations in descriptions based on the data provided. Make sure you're using all the data. Admin, including overall review of all the graders or the examinees. besides the proctor. So you got a lot of data, make sure you're using it all. And yeah, that lengthy list of characteristics, that's just unrealistic. Those are probably two of the big things, is just make sure you get your list focused down, must-haves, optional, should not have, using all the data you have at your hands.
And I don't think we can stress the variation issue enough. We're all different, we all pick things up different. There are going to be some slight variations. Make sure people get credit where credit is due. That's the very important thing.
Definitely not going through bullet point by bullet point on the competencies. Just got these up here so that you can kind of review them. This is directly out of the BJCP score sheet guide. And this is kind of what I'm going to note is important on these competencies, and then following up is the rubric, is it's what was developed to determine what is consistent consensus that should be used by all graders. That's important. Consistent, used by all graders. That was the whole point of all this, is to try to get all the graders consistent and accurate. So if we passed the same set of exams onto another set of graders, they'd get the same type of point. So review these. You may not agree with them, but this is the basis that we used, pulling data from a large number of people, said, okay, this is going to be the guide. Once again, we noted there are some variations. This is a guide. We're not creating robots. If we were just creating robots, we could come up with some sort of program and data analysis, pour a beer in, and pops out. It's like, there you go, that's a 37 beer, and da-da-da-da. It takes more than that. There's more depth to it, to a beer, and judging it. Thus, we need more depth to our grading. But it gives you the guidelines on, it's like, well, what should I expect for a master level, a national level, certified, etc. Kind of that same idea. There's primary characteristics and secondary characteristics. The secondary characteristics become your optional. Can have them, cannot have them. If they're a little more important, it's like, okay, well, you're a little off on your description of it. You're not going to dock them the full points that you would dock for missing a primary characteristic. All right, now the rubric. The rubric is how you determine which level you fall into with your points. Now, basically, each of the 5 components are worth 20 points. Total it up, that's 100. So the scoring accuracy was 20. Perception is going to be 20. So 18 is master level, 16 national, 14 certified, 12 is the passing. Remember, we had 6 to 8 expected characteristics. So no more than 2 elements of the aroma, appearance, and flavor differ from the consensus. No more than 2. Master levels are not perfect. Perfect is 100%. Master level starts at 90%. So kind of remember that. There is error in there. And I think that kind of falls down through, some of the graders get that to fall through. It's like, okay, well, man, this isn't perfect. This is perfect, that's master. Well, if perfect is there, then national is just a little below. And next thing you know, you're pushing, your expectations are a little too high for each level. I don't want to offend anybody here though, but the other thing, mindset that somehow comes in, gets in a little bit, is we do have a lot of national ranked judges, and they probably think, it's like, oh, well, I can do a better score sheet than this, and I haven't been able to get a master level rank, so I'm not going to allow it. Well, maybe you're not really seeing what is needed as a master level. That might be why you haven't gotten to that. You like, oh, I don't understand what the master level is. You don't want to offend anybody, but you got to make sure you pull that mindset out. That's what this guideline is it should help you. When you go, okay, you're a national level, you want to go get that master level, now you got a guideline to know what it is. And I'm sure you would want the grader that's grading your exam to be utilizing that, because you say, I did everything I needed to meet master level. And then if you don't get master level back because whoever graded your exam didn't use it, you're going to get a little upset, right? So don't be that person that someone else is upset at. So kind of try to stay open-minded.
Consistency and fairness are really 2 keys behind this whole rubric. I think there's been a problem in the past, and that's kind of where we're here, is lack of consistency in grading exams, and really that's what we're shooting for. Much more consistent and fair, where you're hopefully going to get the score that you truly deserve.
So you can quick, like I said, I'm not going to read these up. These are in the score sheet guide. I keep saying these are in the score sheet guide because I want every one of you to go and find the score sheet guide and read it and use it next to you to judge. That is how you're going to get consistent. Okay, next component, descriptive ability. Descriptive ability is your ability to describe fully, in depth. Adjectives, get into the detail. Let's see. You can see the big one there. Some score sheets for master and grandmaster judges typically have a proliferation of descriptive information beyond just multi or hoppy. So here's a little example. Apprentice, it's going to say hoppy. Great, there's hops in this beer. That's why you're at an apprentice level if that's all you can write. You start American, I'm like, all right, so at least you can recognize that American hops probably have some sort of range. The other one that drives me nuts is when I see noble hops. Great, noble hops, what does that tell you? You telling me that Saaz and Hallertauer and all these different hops are exactly the same? It's not very detailed. Certified, all right, notice added in the level. There's different intensity levels of all these characteristics you get. So now you got someone understanding, it's like, okay, there's intensity and there's at least some details. Get up, now you're getting the citrusy, and you can go on to the next one. Now you got some depth, so you got the citrusy, and you're noting that there's some secondary characteristics of that hop character. So that's just a real quick example. You can go on. That's really what the descriptive ability is about, is how in depth did they quantify and qualify. That's actually the character, description character, and the level, and in depth. So it's primary and secondary characteristics. So the more complex a beer is, the more description there should be there, and making sure you're keeping everything in check, balancing it all out. So competencies, you go on to the next one, Jim. I'm just going to let you kind of read these along. You can see how many adjectives are needed or expected. I shouldn't say needed there because, like I said, every beer is different, and there may not be that depth, and that's what you need to understand. Once you get your perception and your overall consensus of the description of the beer, now you know what to expect. If it's a really complex beer, you should expect more depth and description from the examinee. If it's a pretty simple beer, you can't be expecting them to go 6 to 8 characteristics deep on a beer that only has 2 or 3. So you got to keep some perspective on that. More specific, multi-hoppy, you've kind of gone over that. No or none, that is very good to actually acknowledge. Didn't pick anything up here. Be surprised how many proctors can't even do that. So kind of read that over. It has the medium spicy, noble, 2 descriptive adjectives for the hop flavor. Qualify and quantify. I really want to get that through because when I'm teaching my study sessions for the wannabe judges, that is a big thing I push is we're going to get to completeness, but describe everything and describe it in the quality and the quantity of every characteristic. Find the primary and then look for the secondary. If you do that, these examinees should be doing very good. You see complete and depth and description. Even if their perception's off or their scoring's a little off, they're usually going to be pretty good because they've got a lot of good data that they're not missing there. This is a little bit of a debate. Obviously, I mentioned noble hops is not a good one. Well, we showed it how it's noble hops, who said American hops, that goes from, the recognized, you're getting apprentice up to the recognized levels. Pilsner malt, well, yes, there's some variations on Pilsner malt, from maltster to maltster. But it's obviously different than 6-row or Munich or any other base malts, and definitely specialty malts. So there is some advantage to using that. But But we've seen some graders that's like instantly full docking of points for using the proper nouns. Well, if it's applicable and it works, and the other thing is look at the intent. Do they show that the score sheet in general is like, yes, they understand what this beer tastes like, smells like, and they're using it properly to give good feedback, or did they just regurgitate the style guidelines because there's supposed to be Pilsner malt in it? Can be a little tough to tell that, but if you can kind of vary your scoring based on that. This is the rubric. I would definitely look at it. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time going through each one. You can do some practice on your own, pull out a score sheet, and count out. This, a lot of work has gone into this. There were some people who went through, I believe it was like hundreds of score sheets to see how many is average and common, and then how many it goes for each level. So, yes, there can be some variations. A more complex beer can have more. A simpler beer may have less. But this is based on average number that has been found in score sheets. So as I mentioned early on, we are trying to get so we can be consistent. We want to be all on the same page, and this gives you that guide. There will be some variation. We're not robots. We're not going to say, oh, I had to find 28 opportunities, so you're making stuff up to get to 28 so that you can get things right. Well, or you stop at 28. Adjust it as needed, but this is your guide. Feedback, fourth component. Once again, this is independent of anything else. This is how to improve, explain why points were deducted. I think that's a big thing, that's a big cue. If they deducted points, there's a reason, right? You do that as a judge, you're going through, it's like, yep, this isn't a 50. You better be able to explain why you took points off, and that's kind of where the feedback is, and then give it some direction on how to improve that. Constructive, consistent with the description. So yeah, we don't want to be degrading the brewer, so you need to see from the judge, the examinee who's going to be a judge, that they're not going to be demeaning, that they can be consistent. They describe a beer, they understand the style, they understand flaws, where they comes from, the cause and effect. This is an exam. They do need to prove they have this ability. Pay attention to the style grid. That's another one that I always kind of find some interesting things with. It's like, all right, you said this is a flawless beer, then you only check the middle box on technical merit. Those are the type of things you're looking, like, well, hey, point out, give me some feedback. Why did you do that?
Feedback is one of those things you want to read real close, because oftentimes what I'll see is the examinee will give this absolutely beautiful summary of the beer, but they will never give any kind of indication that improvement need to be needed, how to improve the beer, anything like that. So watch real close. It's what we call flowery, but really no substance.
Here we're back to, this is the competencies. So this is in the guide that everybody should read if you haven't already. Just kind of goes over, polite, mention that, professional, consistent with the score, diagnosis, go through it. As I mentioned, there's some things I disagree with, but have to follow because we need to be consistent across. One of those is this rule of thumb that's come up for a improvement for each scoring level below outstanding. I personally say if you didn't give it a 50, you should have something to knock it on. And I also think that some things get knocked harder, so if you have a problem and it's a major issue, you may only have one or two things, or you may have a beer that just has a lot of little things. But once again, this is a guide, and that's kind of your reference. One improvement for each scoring level. So that's how I follow. So I adjusted my scoring. Not a lot, I wasn't way off, but I did make sure so that we're all consistent. Yep, no assumptions. That's the other problem with saying noble hops. If you don't know they're noble, you just made an assumption, and now your credibility just went down as a judge. Noble hops, crap, I use Magnum for dry hopping. They're not going to know much about that. Consistency, kind of following through, going through all the same stuff we're just kind of reiterating here. Make sure it's consistent. If watch for saying, okay, it's brown in the color. Well, it's supposed to be a Pilsner, and they gave a 3 for color. It's kind of or for appearance. It's kind of an issue. That's a problem with consistency. Or they, like I said, back to, did they give a 10 for the flavor? And then in their feedback, mention absolutely nothing to improve flavor. You gotta kind of watch that. So follow it through.
And to back up just a little bit, we talked earlier about constructive, polite, and professional comments. Usually if you're going to see something, we'll call it unprofessional, generally speaking it's going to be in the feedback. And we're not really going to talk about how to write RTPs today, but one thing what I do is if I see a comment that is maybe not polite, unprofessional, whatever, I'll draw it to the examinee's attention, but I will also provide them other language that they may be able to use. So if you see things on score sheets like that, please provide suggestions to the examinee on, hey, maybe this type of language could be used in the future to address this issue.
All right, here's the rubric. Number of above feedback elements on the score sheet. So once again, go through the guide. You'll see this is the reference. Okay, obviously the big one, not providing feedback even though score description indicates something is needed, particularly when it's like 30. I think I may have preached this a little too much in my study sessions because I've had some recent students who start scoring beers 50 because they probably can't think of a way to fix it. So I'm like, all right, that's great, but now there'll be no feedback expected from you, but you're going to get docked in a lot of other places because obviously the beer wasn't a 50. So, so it's that consistent. The examinees can try to play games, but as a grader, that's what you're trying to find. It's like, sure, all right, that's great. You did a good job in feedback. You're going to get docked more points than if you would have just played it straight. So, incorrect feedback, cause and control. So, you say something was there and you give them the wrong direction. Once again, this is an exam. You need to know, be sure that the examinee knows how to resolve and has the ability to give direction to people. The third one is kind of, I see feedback as a two-step. One is addressing why the points were deducted. It's like, oh, there's a problem. I'm not going to give full credit on appearance because of something. First, explain why. That's the cause. And then control. Well, how do you fix it? Give some feedback. I know particularly in some of the competitions I am involved with, I don't always push for the judges to be filling out, giving direction on how to feedback, but or how to fix problems, but you need to at least give explanation of why did they get the score they got. I'm glad this one's last because this is my pet peeve on graders. I think it was brought up, Randy early on had mentioned how it's like, oh, you could be all over the place. Completeness, everything's got to be independent. Completeness, feedback. Whereas feedback's usually, from what I've seen, a trailing. It's usually one of the lower scoring because it takes longer for people to, I think what I've seen is both get the confidence in their ability and build their ability to tell someone how they need to change their beer. Perception, scoring accuracy sometimes takes a little while. Descriptive ability, people can learn pretty quick. But this completeness is something that you should be able to teach someone in an hour or two. They may do a bad job at describing the beer, but at least they addressed everything that needed to be done. And what a lot of graders do is highly weight the description area. This is really much more about admin stuff. When we get to it, or if you've got the guide in front of you, you can look at what the rubric is. You'll see there's 12 points, and only 4 of them have to do with the actual description. And they are aroma, flavor, mouthfeel, appearance. There are then 2 on filling out your lines, vertically and horizontally. You do not have to fill every white space up in a score sheet with a bunch of babble that doesn't mean anything, that sometimes reads like a marketing type thing instead of a technical. Realize, do not dock people for being efficient and precise with their descriptions. If the quality is there, it's good. So that only gives 6 out of the 12 of the rubric. That means there's 6 more of them. And when we get to them, you'll see that it's the admin stuff. So, like I said, in theory, easiest category. Getting all the bookkeeping, admin stuff. Overweighting the description. And here's the other one. I've heard this one say, well, no, if the description isn't have that depth, doesn't quantify. If they just say multi, that's not a complete description. A complete description is saying it's medium bready with some hints of caramel, right? That is descriptive ability. We already addressed that in one of the components. If you're docking points on completeness because of that, you're double docking. So keep that in mind. Make sure you are keeping these things independent. It is not uncommon to see 19s, 20s for completeness. Very easy. If you start seeing 16 or below on completeness, in my experience, you're usually generally very low overall scores on exams. If they can't do the simple bookkeeping stuff, they're probably not doing a good job at other things. So don't try to keep all your grades like, well, this is like a certified exam, so I'm going to make sure all my scores are 14, 15, 16, and it's going to average out right. Let it all come together how it should. So the competencies go through, like I said, there were 12. So we got all applicable components. Remember, there's also partial credit. So this is where even compounds the problem of people expecting too much on descriptive ability. There's several aroma components. There's several appearance. There's a bunch of mouthfeel, and there's several more bunch of flavor and several more mouthfeel. Okay, so obviously there's always the hop, malt, and your yeast, your ester type stuff. Well, if they say malty, hoppy, no esters for aroma, what do? For the first one, all applicable components of aroma listed on the score sheet are addressed. They just addressed all of them. They didn't do a good job at it, but they addressed them all. Check. You go through, so there's your first 4 right there. Checking, not quality, just did they do it? Overall impression includes a drinking pleasure, tries to do something positive. I know some beers are tough to do that, but gotta try to at least be positive on it. Organized and legible. Here's the vertical space, the next one's a horizontal space. Once again, is it really a complete credit or no? It's not like yes or no, it could be partial credit. Any one of these can be partial credit. So you can say, okay, well, I'll give them, out of the 12 here, they get 0.5 for that and 0.75 for that and total it up. Actually filled in the number values for each section. The check boxes on the bottom. I know some judges expect people to circle the level, but there's no place in directions that say you have to circle whether I scored it in the very good. And that's not on this list of things to do. Descriptor definitions, those are your flaws, but not necessarily flaws. They are descriptors. I've also heard this from graders. Oh no, those are only flaws, so you only check those if there's a flaws. It doesn't say anywhere that flaw. So if you describe esters, it should be described. What came across the direction on that was if it's at least a low level. So if they're like hints or very light background or just a subtleness, then it was kind of like, well, don't dock them for describing something at such a vague, very low level, very, very low level. So that's kind of where you got some leniency there. And then just the header, exam ID, all the stuff across the top. Applicable components, let's see. That's this descriptors, kind of what I just went over. You've got the esters, the phenols, you got all that stuff going through there. If you describe it at a low level or higher, it should be checked. Should not be checked if you didn't describe it, vice versa. So that's where you're checking that. So once again, it's completeness. Did they stay consistent?
One of the things you got to be real careful of is I know there's a lot of graders out there that feel like if you don't fill in all of the white space, it's not a complete score sheet. Well, one of the things you got to look at is how does a person write? I've had several examinees write very, very small, and quite frankly, they wrote a whole lot more than people who filled up the white space. I've also seen people that write clear out into the margins and maybe only address 1 or 2 issues of the whole score sheet. In fact, I saw one day, there was a vegetal character in the flavor, an entire paragraph on vegetal character. Filled all the white space, but never touched on malt, hop flavor, hop bitterness, finish, balance, nothing. So really read those score sheets carefully when you see a lot of missing lines or open lines to see if the person truly did complete the score sheet.
And then here's your rubric. So like I said, there's 12 of them. Master hits 10. So completeness is a pretty easy one. You can actually kind of go through and it's like, oh, I'll give them partial credit on this one, no credit on this one, full credit on this one, bam, got it, right through. Give you completeness. So the bad scoring exams aren't necessarily the ones that have poor descriptions, or the bad complete scoring ones aren't the ones that have poor description. They're just not doing their admin. They're not filling in the header and being consistent. We'll run through the process stuff, kind of discuss some of this because a lot of the process is on doing the perception, because that's kind of the most time consuming and most difficult. Make sure you do the whole packet, make sure everything's there, it all makes sense. Do the perception expectation. I do that on a beer by beer. I don't do the perception for each beer. I do one beer, grade that beer, and then move on. Keeps it fresh in your mind so you're not confusing them. After you do the perception, do all the grading. That's when, at least I do the scoring accuracy. I mentioned why, tried so it doesn't impact me. Granted, you generally forget, because you got so many exams there, you kind of forget which one was what, but what's the sense of even taking a chance?